is really important, and it's something that we kind of underestimate, really, in that, you know, when I'm working with people and their dogs, everybody loves to have a really nice cue, so they can tell their dog to sit or to down or whatever, and their dog will do what they've been asked to do. But the thing is, that is given far too much importance. It's given far more importance than the word that we need. Here comes Matt. Let's wait for him to come in. Right, Dash can now relax. It's far more important, actually, rather than telling our dogs what to do, to say to our dogs, actually, you've done exactly the right thing. That is what I was trying to tell you to do. And that's brilliant. We're now on the same page. And that's what markers are kind of all about. Because when we're training dogs and they're not doing the thing that we want, generally there's a couple of different, well, there's three main reasons. One of them is that they are in an environment or in a mental state where they're unable to really think. So they're in a state of over arousal. And if that's the case, you'll know because your dog won't take treats and that kind of thing. So that's how you know that that's going to be the issue. In which case, you need to do some calming, go somewhere else. Hi, Victoria. Hi, Vanessa. That kind of thing. The other reasons are that your dog isn't motivated. So, you know, it's something that I think people have got in their heads, that their dogs should just do stuff because we want them to do it. But that kind of doesn't make any sense from a sentient being. You know, a dog, like any other animal, will do the thing that it feels is the best value for that particular dog. And that doesn't necessarily mean just doing something because you ask them to. There has to be a why should I do it? So the general two ways of motivating dogs that we have is we give them something they like. So it could be a food reward. It could be play. It could be some sort of praise or affection or something like that. It can be, you know, anything that's positive. The other thing that can motivate them is obviously being able to avoid something that's unpleasant. We're not going down that track. And then the third reason, and that's why we're here today, is they don't do what we ask them to do because they're not really sure exactly what it is that we're asking for. And the way that we can help them with that is with these markers. So we can use markers for lots of in lots of different ways. So the most common one is a marker that we use to say to our dogs, absolutely, you did exactly what I was asking you to do. So you could use something like a clicker, or you could use a word. So the word yes is really good. So let me give you an example how it's working. You ask your dog to do a down. So at the point when their belly goes on the ground and they're properly in a down, you would want to mark that to say that's the right thing, and then you'd follow up with the reward, whatever that happens to be. And the reason we do that is because as humans, we are not instantaneous with our rewarding, because we can't be. It's just totally impossible. So what a marker does is it provides us with a bridge. So it says to the dog, you did the right thing and the reward is coming. And that gives you a little bit of grace. That gives you a few seconds in between the marker and the behaviour and the reward, where you can sort of organise your hands and brain and all that kind of stuff. It's far, far easier to mark than it is to reward. So that's why we use it as a bridge. So there's a few things we need to do. So the first one is we need our dogs to know that when they hear the marker, or, you know, if you've got a deaf dog, it might be they see the marker. When they hear the marker, they need to know that without any shadow of a doubt, the reward is about to come. So this is part one of things that can go horribly wrong. And that is where we use a marker and then we don't follow it up with the reward. So we're breaking that association. So say I ask for the down, I think that the down's about to happen, I preempt it, so I go yes. And then actually the dog stands up again because they think I'm getting the reward. I'm going to try and go towards it. That's and so we go, oh, I'm not giving you the reward because you didn't do it properly, but we've already given the marker. So it's really, really important. It's more important than anything really to keep that connection really, really, really super strong. So what do we use as a marker? Now, the example I gave there was using the word yes, and that's a really common one, and that's probably the one that I use the most. You'll see people use clickers, and clickers are absolutely brilliant, and I love using clickers for training tricks and that kind of thing because you can be so precise. Because a brilliant thing with a clicker is it sounds the same every time you click it. So it's really clear that that's the marker. The second thing is it's really short and sharp. So it's accurate. You can really accurately click for the thing that you want, because our dogs will be noticing lots of things that they're doing and lots of things that are happening. So for us, we need to be really precise to mark the actual thing that we want rather than the thing that they think that we've marked. And this is where I sometimes see people go wrong. So what they'll do is they'll ask their dog to do something, or they'll lure them into a position or whatever, and then they go, good boy, good girl. And say, well, that's my marker, that's my marker. And I kind of get why, you know, it kind of comes quite naturally, doesn't it? But the trouble with it is it's really, really woolly. It takes ages to say good boy or good girl. And while you're saying it, all manner of things can have happened, and your dog could be associating any one of those things as being the thing that they were supposed to do, which is why people use clickers, because they are super duper accurate. It's just a quick click and it's really super clear. Now, the downside of clickers, and the reason that I don't use them particularly often, is just because I never have them with me. I don't have them with me all the time because, you know, they're a thing that you'd have to have, you know, on your person in order to be able to use it. So that's why I tend to use a yes. It's not as accurate as a clicker. So if I'm doing something a little bit more complex, I might use the clicker instead and, you know, set up a training session. But yes, obviously I've always, well, I say always got my voice, pretty much always got my voice, thankfully. So I can generally use that. Now, I think a really great tip is to actually practice the timing of your marker, because again, it's something we can get a little bit sloppy. So say we are teaching our dogs to do a foot target. So they're putting their front feet on an object. This is something I do quite a lot. I love this behaviour actually, and the dogs really love it. It's a real kind of like power pose for them. They feel really confident doing it. Great for dogs that are a little bit worried and we need to build their confidence. But it's got lots of, it's a nice grounding behaviour as well. It's got lots of other super duper reasons. So when we start that, say you've got a dog that's a little bit reluctant to do it, because if I use a little yoga block. If I put a yoga block down for this dog and I'm saying, well, I want you to put your feet on that. With a dog that's a little bit worried, there are a lot of issues with that. Firstly, they're going to feel a little bit unbalanced because their feet are going up on something and their front feet are going up on something and their back legs aren't. It's going to feel weird underneath their feet. And if you haven't got, depending on what surface you put it in, there's the possibility it's going to slip. And even if you know it's not going to slip, your dog doesn't know that until they've tried it. So they might be really worried about it. And if that's the case, we need to break down that behaviour and start just with them touching it with a paw. And that is something you have to capture really accurately. So you're watching for this paw to touch this foot target. You need to make sure that the absolute moment that paw touches it, that's when you mark. And that's how you're going to get that behaviour growing really effectively. So I would do things like, you know, watch your dog doing something and say, okay, I am going to mark every time that they put their foot on that rug over there. You're not going to do anything with it particularly, but you can just practice that mark. So you could just go yes and feed. Okay, make sure you carry on with the feed if your dog's in the room. It doesn't matter if they haven't actually achieved anything. That's just, you know, strengthening, powering up that marker. So that's okay to do. The other thing you can do is practice it when the dog isn't in the room. So a way of doing that is you might have a I've used a balloon for this, and I think this works really, really well. So do this without your dog around, and you might throw a balloon in the air, bat it about a little bit, and when it hits the floor, you're going to mark the instant it hits the floor. Now, you're not going to mark just before, you're not going to preempt it. You're going to wait until it hits the floor, and then in that instant, you're going to go, yes. And try that a few times. Now, my suggestion is that you video yourself doing that, or at least keep the video, you know, put the camera, set the camera up so the camera can see the balloon. The camera's nice and low down so you can capture exactly when the balloon hits the floor, and that you've got the sound. And then you can watch it back and you can see how accurate you were. Did you preempt the balloon hitting the floor? Did you get it exactly on time? Or were you a little bit late because you got in a little bit of a panic? If you've got a helper in the room, you can get them actually to move the balloon around so it's a little bit more unpredictable. And I think that's a really nice way to practice how good we are at timing that marker, because that part of the mechanics of trading is something that I can certainly work on, and I think we can all work on, and it'll make all our training an awful lot more effective. So I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. So yeah, I definitely be doing that. So that's a way that we can practice getting that accuracy of that marker. When you're working with your dog, think to yourself when you're marking something. So use the example of that foot target. So when they touch the block with their foot, is that the only thing that you could be marking at that point, or is there something else? So think about, are you doing something with your body? Is there something else they're doing with their body? Just be aware that your dog is becoming really clear of exactly what it is that you are marking, and then make sure you're always following up with the food. So the big message I want to get across today really is to start seeing marking a behaviour that we're looking for as far more important than putting a word cue on it. We'll talk about cues next week and where they go right and wrong and what's great about them. But at the end of the day, with most behaviours, having a cue that's with your hands or your body language or something like that is equally, if not more effective than having a verbal cue. So if we want to have something to say to our dogs, let's have the thing that we're going to say, rather than ordering them around, let's have the thing that we're going to say as a, yes, you did the right thing. Absolutely flipping amazing. Now, of course, when we reward, say we're using a food reward, we don't necessarily always reward to the mouth. What we might do is throw a piece of food and get our dogs to find it. And in that case, we might use a different marker. So a marker like search. So that they know that actually in this case, it's okay to go and get the food off the floor. Now, if you've done some work with me, you will have probably done some work on that kind of impulse control and disengagement from food, whether it's in your hand or whether it's on the floor. So we can sometimes get a little bit of a contradiction in your dog's head, in that we might want to throw something for them to get, and they're thinking, well, hang on a minute. When I was on my chill zone and they dropped a piece of food, I wasn't supposed to get off my chill zone and get it. When I was playing a game and they were trying to, you know, I had to move back from that piece of food on the floor. In this case, they're saying you can go and get that piece of food on the floor. So we need to make it clear that that's okay. So you can have a different marker where you throw a piece of food and you go say search, and then that's okay. And sometimes, you know, if you've got a dog that you've done an awful lot of impulse control stuff with, they can find it really blooming difficult. So you kind of have to encourage them. So you throw the food and then you point at it and you use lots of excited party time voices and that kind of thing to encourage them and say, in this case, it's okay. So again, you're using your body language and you're using your verbals to say to your dog, this is the time when it's okay to do this behaviour, and this is the time when it isn't okay to do this behaviour. And our dogs are perfectly capable of learning that distinction. That isn't a problem. You know, they are intelligent animals, and they can make those distinctions. But on the proviso that we are really, really clear about telling them what our expectations are. So we can have various different markers. Another example of another sort of marker I use is that there is some training that we do where I am marking a thing happening which is external to the dog. So the dog isn't doing something specifically. Either a thing is being done to them or a thing is happening in the environment, and they're noticing it. And I want to mark that noticing rather than a doing. So there's a couple of great examples. For example, the first one would be a collar grab. And a collar grab can be I probably would teach it, you know, to any dog that is okay with that sort of handling. I'd certainly be something I'd introduce to puppies. And the reason is it's a useful thing to have when you're recalling, when you're taking the dogs to the vets. You know, it's a great start for any kind of handling type stuff. It means that, you know, you can move your dog from A to B, and it just gives you lots and lots of options. And getting your dog to actually not only having their collar grabbed, but to seek it out is a really positive thing to be able to do. But in that case, when you're training it, all you're going to do is hold the dog's collar. I usually hold it the side, so you're not like that or grotting them from the back. So hold it just gently at the side. And then I want to say a marker to say, well, you've noticed I've got your collar. Now a piece of food is going to appear in your mouth. How good's that? So I would use treats. So hold the collar, treat, a piece of food goes in the mouth. And if you could see that distinction, it's a slightly different thing. And then another marker is when they notice something in the environment, and that's huge. Actually, that's a really big one, because that's what we can use to tell our dogs, yes, you've noticed something. You don't actually need to do anything with it. Let's just acknowledge that you've noticed it. Brilliant. So that might be a calmer marker. So I might go calm, in a really calm way. And again, the dog hasn't had to do anything. They've just noticed something in the environment. So I would then feed them then. And that's a really big one. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think we can all challenge ourselves to do. It's just think about how we are marking things. You know, we often see people describing their dogs, my dog's really stubborn, or my dog's not very clever. And usually that's not the case. I mean, stubbornness isn't really a thing with dogs. It tends to be that the dog isn't clear what they need to do at that point, or they're motivated to do something else, so they haven't got the motivation to do what you want. So it's all about this clarity, these markers, and that motivation. If you've got those things right, then stubbornness isn't going to be an issue for you. That's not to say it isn't difficult. Particularly, you know, the motivation part of it for some dogs is really blooming hard work. Having that clarity, those mechanics of the markers, again, it's not easy. So something you do have to kind of work on and start, you know, think about how you can get better at it. You know, practice some of the simple games, like the holding a piece of food in your hand. When your dog moves backwards from it, that's when you're going to mark, and you're marking that movement backwards. That's a really nice one to practice with. So yeah, those are my kind of key points really with markers. Has anybody got any thoughts or questions? I think what I'm basically trying to say is give them more importance. One proviso though, actually, if you've got a dog that's really Some dogs are really pressure sensitive. Dash is a great example. For him, training sessions are always really short, because if he feels under any pressure, he will check out. And sometimes for a dog that's super pressure sensitive, having training sessions where you're not marking anything and you're just rewarding everything are a great idea. That's slightly sideways, and that's a little bit just about growing confidence in very pressure sensitive dogs. Super. So, any questions? Lovely.